Hi everybody, my name is Kevin Cam. I'm with a company called Focus Motion, and what we do, awesome, all right. So what we do is we essentially track human motion through wearable devices. But what I'm here to talk about is biometric marketing, and this new kind of idea that we're going to be able to track how people are feeling through some of the new wearable technology that's going to be available. So first off, we have sensors. Sensors are amazing. Sensors allow insight with consumers and users in ways that we never really thought possible before. They also allow the permission of ecosystems to be built. If you think about the sensors in the space and all the applications that have developed around these sensors, and they allow brands to really interrelate with their users. They allow them to understand pieces of the user's life that the user doesn't have to share keys. It can all be done automatically. And one of the sensors we take for granted is time. Time is on every device that we have, and with time we know when users are going through our devices, we know when they walk into our doors, and then with GPS, we know where they are. And then with logins, we know who people are. So we know who, we know when, we know where. That leaves a couple of things left over. The first thing is what, and that's what my company does. So what is essentially us being able to determine what users are doing at any given point in time based on wearable activity. I'm not going to go into detail, I can give you a demo afterwards if you like. Well, what we do is we use sensors like accelerometers and gyroscopes to determine any type of activity that a user is performing, from a handshake to a high five to sexual intercourse. And this is some of the things that we do. But what I'm excited to talk to you guys today about is how. How do users feel? What are the emotions that they're going through as they use your product, as they engage with your brand, as they talk to you? And most of you have seen this, right? Everyone's familiar that this is going to come out. There's going to be some amazing applications with it. They've heavily invested in producing this. But I'm not necessarily interested in the front of this device. I'm interested in the back. Because for the first time in human history, all of the major consumer electronics corporations are putting heart rate monitors and other types of sensors on wearable devices. Which means people are going to be wearing medical devices out, which means laboratory science is going to be taken out of the laboratory for the first time. If you follow this field at all, you'll know that Basis has been in this for a while. Neo's been in it for a while. Polar has been in it for a while. But in the last year, Sony, Samsung, Motorola, Microsoft have some things that they're working on, and then also Apple and LG. So it's a space that something is going to happen. So to give you an idea what biometric marketing could look like, or how you would track a user, it doesn't have to be an app on the watch. It doesn't have to be an app on the band. You could be using any application that you're using right now as you're browsing, let's say Facebook. There's nothing stopping an application manufacturer from turning on the heart rate monitor, potentially even without the user knowing. So as they're engaging, or as they're walking through your door, you're monitoring their emotional state. You're monitoring heart rate. You're monitoring skin level. You're monitoring blood glucose levels. You're monitoring hydration, potentially blood pressure, temperature. And someone somewhere out there is building an algorithm that will help you understand their emotional state as they're using these applications. And this is going to change everything. This is going to change entertainment. It's going to change consumption, dating, insurance, everything. And to give you guys some examples of how it's going to change it, talk to entertainment first. It used to be, with entertainment or content production, you had to go out and you had to ask your users what they were thinking. You had to have them fill out sheets. You had to do focus groups. You don't really need that anymore, because you can tell how they're going to be feeling during the entire movie or during the entire content presentation. I could tell right now how all of you would be reacting to this presentation if you volunteered that information. So I don't really care about what you're going to say to me afterwards, because I can tell how you feel. The other thing is gaming. Do you guys recognize this? Farmville, right? So the perfect Skinner box, right, of random reward cycles and systems. A brilliant, brilliant game that took advantage of people's psychology, right? This is going to get even scarier, because games and gamification are going to be able to offer users real-time stimulus response based on emotional profiles. They're going to be able to do perfect random reward cycles based on individual emotional states. And I'm not talking about different users. I'm not talking you as individual people. How was your day that day? What is your emotional state at that particular moment? And they'll be able to reward you based on that. Is it time to give you something like a carrot or a stick? And then dating. This is actually kind of fun, because this gets into my world. So let's say I was terrible at being single, but let's say you go out to a bar and you meet somebody and you have a handshake. My company can detect the handshake. We initiate galvanic response recording between those two individuals at that point in time. You could actually see their arousal levels. You could see how they reacted to each other over time. And what that'll do is it'll build arousal profiles. You'll also be able to have emotional pairing and emotional matching in ways that really weren't possible before. So in the same ways that you fill out your biological profile with eHarmony and Match, this is going to be a new type of profile based on the user. How do they react to situations? How do they perform under stress? And this is something you could actually access. And then this is one of my favorites too, brand experiences. Let's say you're a brand and you have something out there, you have a physical brick and mortar store, somebody walks in. The minute that they walk in, you can track them. Using geofencing, you'll be able to understand who's come into your store, you'll be able to monitor their emotional state, and you'll be able to understand how that experience was for them, from entrance to exit, potentially after the exit, and then you'll also be able to know on a per employee, per customer, per store basis of how everything is going with that unit. You can understand stress levels and peaks and times and customers that might be problems. And this is fun too. So think about the worst day that you've ever had. At that point in time, were you ready to receive information? Were you ready for a brand to connect with you? Probably not, depending on the brand. And like I said before, users and brands, these sensors allow them to interact. But the timing is extremely important for when you choose to talk to that person. We know each other. If I walked out here and some of you looked like you were in a bad mood, I wouldn't approach you. But brands don't have that insight, but they're soon to have that insight. And what I think is going to develop is something called emotional fencing. So with emotional fencing, what you'll be able to do as a user or as a brand, identify the emotional states that you want to target and when to target those states. And again, this isn't based on a user. This is based on the micro pieces of their emotional states as they go throughout the day. So as a user, if I'm having a bad day, I can say, I don't want a brand to contact me. And this might be something that I build into it. And as a brand, you don't want to talk to that user either. So you can choose the states. There may even be bidding wars for being able to advertise for users that are in the perfect emotional state to receive that type of conversation. And this is a new frontier. I hope that a lot of this might be new to some of you guys, because it's new to me. And we're at the very beginning of this. We're at the very beginning of understanding how to use this and go through it. So every piece of data and every heartbeat is getting this group smarter. And it's enabling things like deep data diving. And by what I mean by that, it's not necessarily the conglomeration of a ton of different data, like big data, and looking at that and understanding different ways that that relates. I'm talking about looking at data very minutely in a way that wasn't possible before. And this gets into what I do. So you guys can probably guess how we're tracking movements, right? So this is an accelerometer reading of what one curl looks like. This is what 5 curls looks like. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You can tell there's something different about the last one. Can any of you guess what that would be? What'd you say? It's exactly it. It's when you shake. So the reason that's possible is because we have an accelerometer that has a hertz level fast enough to detect that level of sensitivity through the user. So what we're able to do, and this is a very simple example, is predict fatigue for athletes, predict fatigue for physical therapy. And we're hoping that the same type of translation will happen with heartbeat, will happen with skin galvanics, will happen with emotional states. So you'll get really deeper insights on individuals and patterns. And the next question is, will this happen? We think it will. So from 2011 to 2018, fitness and health devices have grown from about 11 million devices, 20 million devices to 285 million devices. And in this sector, it's expected that smartwatches will grow from 1 million to 92 million. And of all the people that are buying these devices, what they're looking for is health and fitness applications. So what you have is you have a lot of people buying a lot of devices from every major consumer electronics manufacturer in the space, and people are asking and being willing to let go of some of their health data. So for us, it's not necessarily a matter of if this is going to happen, but when. And it's going to be soon. Literally just this morning, I got off the phone with a company in South Africa that I was telling John about called LifeQ. LifeQ has invented a brand new type of sensor set that beats any other type of sensor on the market for heart rate and also skin galvanics. They can get into metabolites, determining what you've eaten that day, determining how that affected your body as well. And if you haven't paid attention, all of the CPGs are looking into this space. Pepsi is looking into it. It's pretty phenomenal. And this is a space that I'm extremely excited about and we're participating in. And I'm going to hand it off to John because I'm pretty sure you guys are thinking of some of the privacy concerns that might be revolving around this, and he'll be able to speak to it. Thanks, man.
Great. It's great to be here this afternoon. I do have to start with an apology, though, which is I have absolutely no PowerPoint slides to share with you, and I know that's going to be a huge disappointment. Certainly understand. I wanted to start just by building on the talk you just heard about biometrics, because as interesting and as powerful as that is, it's just one small example of a set of technologies that are proliferating around the world that have to do with what's broadly known as the Internet of Things. Basically sensor-driven technology that is increasingly making the invisible visible in all dimensions. The sensors in our cars, sensors in our homes, sensors in stores, sensors in the work environment are increasingly tracking every move we make. Every minute of the day is being captured and recorded. Now, I don't know about you, but that's kind of scary. Do you really want every movement, every action, every emotional state captured and recorded? Throughout history, many of our ancestors moved from the countryside, small villages, into cities, specifically because we wanted to have some invisibility. In those small villages, people knew everything about everything we did. And that was kind of scary for a lot of people, and they sought refuge in cities because now they could be more anonymous, more invisible. Well, we're going back to the village in the city. And it does create significant privacy issues. Now, at the end of the day, I think those privacy issues are going to get resolved, but first of all, they need to be understood. One of the privacy questions is opt-in versus just, is this going to happen automatically? And I think we can overcome a lot of the privacy concerns if there is an opt-in feature. So we're making choices about when that invisible will become visible. But even there, I don't think that's enough. I think ultimately, and I've been studying privacy and information capture for decades now, and I will say from all the work I've done, my belief is that, yes, there are a few privacy absolutists, people who just want to be private and don't want to be visible at all. They want to be off the grid. But that's a tiny minority of people. Most people, their primary concern, two things. One is, am I getting value in return for the information I'm providing? And if I get value, I'm okay with providing that information. In fact, I'll provide some more of it if you want, if you can give me even more value back. But that's a key requirement, is that value in return. What's that tangible value? And I think one of the issues here is that at the end of the day, I believe this kind of tracking and making the invisible visible is going to be a catalyst for shifting our whole approach to marketing in a very profound way. I'm going to oversimplify here, and I hope not to offend too many in the audience, but I believe we're still operating within a world, a certain marketing mindset, which is a very adversarial mindset. I'm struck by the number of military metaphors we have in marketing. Target the audience, target the customer, campaigns, guerrilla marketing. We're in the military and there's an enemy out there. It's the customer. And in that mindset, your goal is, you have three primary goals. One is to intercept that customer wherever they are. My favorite example, in a world of increasing competition for attention, my favorite example is we're starting to install videos above urinals in the men's room. Talk about a captive audience and intercepting the enemy. Job done. So you intercept them, and then you inhibit. You make it as difficult as possible for them to compare and get visibility around any options. You want all their attention. And then, if you manage to accomplish that, you have a third objective, which is to isolate. It's to create that famed one-to-one marketing relationship, the walled garden. It's just you and me. And man, we're going to have so much fun together. That's the mindset that we have in this traditional approach to marketing. I believe we're moving to a different approach, which I call collaborative marketing. And basically, it's got 3 objectives as well, but different ones. The first objective, in a world where there's more and more competition for attention, is how do you attract people to you? How do you get them to seek you out, wherever you are? Rather than trying to intercept them, get them to find you. And how do you do that? Why would they ever do that? Well, at the end of the day, I think it's by assisting, by being helpful to that person. Helpful in as many dimensions as possible. If you're selling a product or a service, it's first of all being helpful in terms of evaluating different options and what's the right product or service for me. And then once the product and service has been bought, how can you be as helpful as possible in terms of adding value to the use of that product or service? So assistance becomes the reason people are going to seek you out, because you were so helpful. I need that help. Where are you? I'll find you wherever you are. And then the third element that comes into play here is if you're really serious about assisting people, I don't care how big you are and how much expertise you have, you're never going to be as helpful to that person as if you bring together a lot of other participants, other vendors, other advisors, other customers, so that they can all join together to be as helpful as possible to that customer. So that third element is affiliating with as many people as possible to be as helpful as possible so that customers will seek you out. That is a fundamentally different mindset, fundamentally different approach to marketing than we're used to. But I believe in order to take advantage of the kind of data that is now available, it is going to be critical to overcoming the privacy concerns. If we are giving value back to that customer in a very tangible way, they'll be much more willing to give the data and, again, give even more data if you can be that helpful to me. And at the end of the day, I think the opportunity is to become what I call the trusted advisor to the customer. Trusted advisor in terms of moving beyond a transaction to a true trust-based relationship, and one where you're increasingly moving from the use of data. The first level of value from the data is just description. Give me a picture of the context of the customer. What is that context? A broader view of the context for the customer. But then going to predictive. Can I predict, based on the data I have, what that customer is going to do and what that customer is going to need? And then the ultimate value is prescriptive. Can I take the data that I have and actually be proactive in terms of offering advice, rather than waiting for the customer to come to me and say, I need this particular thing. Reach out to the customer as a trusted advisor and say, by the way, given your context, you might want to think about this, and not in the narrow marketing sense of cross-selling and upselling, but because it's genuinely relevant to that customer at that point in time, and where the reaction of the customer is, wow, that was amazing. How did they know? That was so helpful. So I think it's a very big opportunity if executed properly. Now, huge opportunity, but I think there's a need to start small and move your way towards that opportunity. And I'm very much struck by, I have this notion of what I call value exchanges, which is the key to building trust around data, is to start with whatever data you have and give value back, tangible value back to the customer, so they have a sense of what the value of that data is to them. One example that I use is a company I think you're all familiar with. It's more in the business-to-business arena, but Cisco. One of the things Cisco found is that they were increasingly dealing with third-party intermediaries to get to their enterprise customers. In the early days, they relied on a direct sales force. Increasingly, they had these third-party channels that they were reaching the customers through. And those third-party channels were protecting information about the customer, to the point where Cisco often didn't even know the name of these enterprise customers, much less anything about them. Cisco did something quite interesting. They created an online website, and they invited enterprise customers to come to that website, and they started by offering some very simple analytic tools, a few questions, and I can provide you some recommendations or insight. And then another set of questions. If you wanted more insight, here are a few other questions, and I'll give you some further answers or advice. And so is this notion of very quickly and tangibly giving value back to the customer that helped to build some real trust with those customers. And then another thing Cisco did, which was very interesting, they had 40,000 channel partners. And based on the insight they were getting about their customer, about these customers coming to their website, they would start pulling in those 40,000 elements of those 40,000 partners to provide value to the customer. You know, it could be that the customer needed some additional consulting to frame their particular needs. Well, we have a consultant that specializes in your type of business. Let's bring that person in. It could be you needed site prep. It could be you needed installation. It could be that you needed training for employees after the installation. All of these by very highly specialized partners who were called in on an as-needed basis around a specific customer's needs. Very helpful to the customer, and not just Cisco, but now 40,000 partners on demand to address the needs of the customer. That's significant value, and it provides a building of trust that is very powerful. But one thing it I think drives home is that at the end of the day, it's not about the data. It's about the analytics. I can't tell you the number of companies I deal with who brag about the petabytes of data that they have in their data warehouses. And I ask, well, what are you doing with all this data? And I get kind of these awkward looks, and well, you know, someday we'll figure out what we really should do with it, but we got it. It's not about the data. If you're not using the data to provide tangible value back to the customer, you will not build that kind of trust and the trusted advisor relationship. And I'll go a step further and say it's actually not even about the analytics on the data. It's about the platform. Because ultimately, the way to build the most trust and to be most helpful to customers is to create platforms where you can draw in third parties to be helpful based on the data and the analytics that have been done. And I'll go even one step further and say it's not about the platform, it's ultimately about the mindset. If we don't have that mindset around collaboration marketing, around how can we be more helpful to customers, how can we take the data we have and provide more value, tangible value back to the customer, doesn't matter. Platforms aren't going to do it, analytics aren't going to do it, and the data certainly isn't going to do it. So it requires a fundamental shift in mindset in order to accomplish this. But at the end of the day, the rewards are pretty great. There's a big opportunity here around the notion of leverage, which is in a world that we're facing more and more pressure, how can we tap into the capabilities of third parties to add more value to the customer? You know, one of the interesting things about that Cisco story is that at the end of the day, even though Cisco was calling in all of these specialized participants to come in and add value to their customers, Cisco was basically the hub of all the data collected around the interactions of all these third parties. Cisco alone had the integrated view of the customer and could be more and more helpful to the customer based on that data. And that was very powerful. So I think it's an interesting opportunity, and ultimately the opportunity is around something that I call leveraged growth. You know, we as companies are increasingly under pressure to show growth, more revenue growth. Where's the growth? The investors are all asking. And typically when most companies think about growth, they think about it in two forms. Make versus buy, right? We're all familiar with that. If you want to grow, you got to grow organically. You got to invest to build the capability. Or you go out and buy it. M&A activity. I would suggest there's a third path to growth that's becoming increasingly viable here, which is a notion of leveraged growth. How can we tap into and mobilize more third parties to add value to our customer relationships and generate increasing value for them and for ourselves in the process? Very different model of growth. So, big opportunity here. I'm going to make the case, actually, that it's not an opportunity. It's an imperative. We have to do this. It's not a choice to decide, okay, someday when we figure the time is right, we'll move to this new model. It is an imperative. I run a research center called the Center for the Edge, and we spend a fair amount of time looking at long-term trends in the global economy. And one of the key trends that we focused on is what I call the dark side of all this technology. I'm from Silicon Valley, and we're supposed to just talk about the incredible opportunities that are created by all this technology. There is a dark side, and the dark side is we all, as individuals and as companies, are under increasing performance pressure. Barriers to entry and barriers to movement are going down on a global scale. No matter what position we've established and how many accomplishments we have, we're increasingly vulnerable to that attacker who's coming after us. So mounting performance pressure, and by the way, one of the key reasons for that mounting performance pressure is all this digital technology is giving increasing power to the customer. We all, in part of our lives, are customers, and we enjoy incredible benefits, far more value at far lower cost, the ability to switch from one vendor to another at a moment's notice if we're not getting what we need. And that power of the customer is squeezing the profitability of companies. We looked at return on assets for all public companies in the US from 1965 to today, and over that time period, return on assets has basically collapsed in the US. It's gone down by 75%. It's not leveling off, and there's certainly no sign of it turning around. So in a world of mounting performance pressure, I would suggest that we do need to find ways to deliver far more value to the customer. And the way to do that is through this notion of collaboration marketing, where we're tapping into providing more and more insight, becoming the trusted advisor to the customer. The companies that figure this out are going to be the winners in this new landscape. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Want to come back up, Kevin? And John want to have a seat. So schedules being what they are, we don't have a whole heck of a lot of time, but I don't know about you. I was fascinated by this. And so let's open it up right now to any questions for John or Kevin. Yes, ma'am.
Going back to the privacy issue, how do we begin to separate what you can opt in and out of? Because as all these, I think most people are going to go with one or two devices. I mean, many of us have a ton of them right now, but eventually you really just want one or two, right? I mean, how many watches and phones can you have at a certain point? It gets a little unwieldy. So my question is, as you may want to have your watch on to measure how many steps you take in a day, on the other hand, you may not want someone collecting information on your heart rate, let's say, or knowing where you're going.
Right.
So how does all that get separated?
I think one of the best things that John mentioned really was these ideas of platforms that people can build on top of. And I think the best platform is going to be the one that people are going to be the one they want to wear. I think, like you said, there's a lot out there. But from a privacy issue, I think what we're seeing, especially with my company, is that people want to take their data with them, and they want to understand where their data is going and how it's being used. Right now, the reason I brought up the concept that I could turn on the heart rate monitor without you knowing is to scare you, is to say that that's not something that's being regulated right now from a consumer perspective, from an FDA perspective, from an app perspective, from a platform perspective. So I think what you're going to see over the next 5 years is some heavy regulation in the space as they start to determine what's possible and what should be what data the user should be allowed to carry with them and what not. And then it's up to the brand to decide, I think, what type of relationship. With John saying the trusted advisor, that's extremely important. So like with some of our technology, we can actually intervene with users in ways not really possible from a fatigue level. So you could say you need to stop doing this thing, you need to start doing this thing, or you need to eat this or drink this. You've really got to trust a brand to tell you the right thing to do and not to just shove products down your throat to allow them into your life in such an intimate way. And if you want to.
I would just add that I think while regulation certainly is likely to be part of this scenario, at the end of the day, I believe it's going to be driven by the customers. I mean, customers have more and more power, and as the visibility of what's being captured and what's being done with that information becomes available, I think at the end of the day, the platforms that offer very robust opt-in capabilities and choices down to the level of specific metrics and specific points in time are going to be the ones that will get the adoption.
Mm-hmm. Other questions out there? Yes.
John, you talked about measuring value or creating value. How do you measure? What's your view on measuring what really is significant value?
It's a great question. I think at the end of the day, part of the way to measure value is just, again, how many people are seeking you out versus you having to go find them. Because if you are offering value, word will spread and people will seek you out. And I think in other dimensions, I mean, there's been a big topic around return ROI as a key question here. I'm actually very, very dubious about ROI metrics. I've dealt with spreadsheets long enough to know that anybody who has control of the spreadsheet can make an ROI look like anything. At the end of the day, I think the measure of value is going to be much more in terms of things like retention rates, operating metrics. Mm-hmm. How long do I have the customer? Is there a higher or lower churn rate? What's the cost of acquisition of customers? What's the profit that I'm generating during the life of the customer? Those kinds of things, I think, are proxies for value being provided.
I have sort of a two-part question myself. I mean, we've been talking a lot here about getting the data and the trust related to the data, but it feels to me like there are communication and societal questions here. And the communication question for me is, say, you've got the shirt on, the shirt's monitoring away, and it says you're about to have an incident of atrial fibrillation. Mm-hmm. Who does the shirt call? You, the ambulance company, your doctor, your wife, your priest, and who decides who the shirt calls?
Right. That's actually a really awesome question, because we wanted to do fall detection, which is very big in our industry as far as determining if someone has fallen and they're not able to get up. And Life Alert does a great job with that. But from our perspective, that's something that's heavily regulated, because you don't want to have a false 911 call. There's a company out there that's doing something similar to what we're doing with helmets. And so if you're riding your bike, you have a catastrophic event, they'll call your best friend, or you can name the person you want them to call. They will not call 911 because they don't want to be associated with that.
What do you think, John?
Yeah, I think, again, in my mind, the answer ultimately is up to the individual. Part of the opt-in is being able to specify who gets notified under what circumstances, and that's the protocol that gets followed.
Which then sort of implies a pretty big education effort, and people don't even know what atrial fibrillation is, let alone that, right. Maybe this one you better call the ambulance pretty quick, because by the time your doctor calls you back, you're in no position to pick up the phone. Yeah. And the same sort of thing on the societal level. So you can make the case that there's a societal benefit from fewer people having heart disease. There's a societal benefit from fewer people having diabetes. But that's at one level, but at the other level, I don't want you to know this about me. I don't want to let you know what I eat. I don't want you to tell me that my heart's acting a little wacky, and so there's a tension there. It's in everybody's interest. Taxes will go down, all of that kind of thing. If fewer people are getting sick, if you're actually able to track Ebola risk behaviors, and yet there are these questions of essentially personal integrity, aren't there?
Yeah. I mean, I think what what I'm hoping for is societal benefit overall. It's just a matter of
how we get there and how fast we get there. I think overall we'll benefit from these types of sensors, and if we have companies that are behaving well, we'll benefit from it. It's just a matter of, there's going to be, and we've seen it already, some interesting issues. Like, did you guys follow the Fitbit case where there was a divorce involved because the husband detected his wife was having sex in the evening? Yeah.
I rest my case, Your Honor.
So that's there's interesting, like he said, privacy issues, and there's interesting societal benefit issues. Who do we want to listen to us, and how do we want them to listen to us, and how do we want intervention?
Yeah, exactly. We have time maybe for one more question out there. Anybody have one? Yeah, way in the back.
Yeah, hi. This is a question for Kevin around the biometric sensors. My husband and kids were having a little bit of a fun because they were talking about driverless cars.
Yeah.
But they talked about you could program it so that it would know traffic's coming, when to veer left, when to veer right.
Right.
So my husband, I don't know why he thought this was funny, but he was playing with them and he gave them some ethical dilemmas. So if there's a bus of school children going on one side versus an ambulance on the other, what are you going to pick? But I mean, I think, my point is there are a lot of ethical considerations and dilemmas, moral dilemmas, which we haven't quite addressed yet with a lot of new technology, right? So I don't know if you see that, but we're talking about privacy. And that could veer on ethics, I guess. But and I thought it was an interesting. He made my kids think about something otherwise they were thinking was just cool and fun.
Quick comments on the inherent ethical dilemmas before we wrap.
No, I think we're just at the very beginning of even seeing those ethical dilemmas, much less resolving them. And as you make more and more data visible, I mean, there are consequences. And
Who would you trust to make that decision? Is there one company out there you would choose between a bus of school children versus like 5 elderly people?
Before we open Pandora's philosophical box on that one, I think we're going to rest with the question you can all think about your personal answer. And I want to thank you guys
thank you.
a lot for really, really interesting.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Mike.
Yeah.